Canada has a problem. It's so big it has put Saudi Alberta and woke Ontario on the same side. The crisis has her own social media and even billboards. The problem is so ingrained, many Canadians aren't attempting to actually solve it, but trying to get in now to take advantage. Last year, house prices reached twice those south of the border. Americans, by the way, make more money. Canada as a nation has a higher ratio of prices over income than San Francisco. And so the question asks itself, how on earth did one of the world's largest countries run out of room? The mystery of what caused Canada's housing crisis is complex and at the intersection of multiple trends. First on the block is immigration. Canada is one of the most immigrant-friendly nations in the world, even more so than the US, at least right now. The government has gone so far as to take advantage of migrants and use them to solve some of the country's biggest problems. For example, labor. Canada is on a bit of a treadmill. Its birth rate is low and declining, even among newcomers. Immigrants fill in the skill gaps, but they grow old as well, perpetuating the problem. Still though, without immigrants, Canada's population would have already been shrinking, causing problems throughout the economy, labor force, and government. If you want to know more about the consequences of an aging and declining population, watch my previous video on Italy. Link in the description or in all likelihood on the right side of your screen. People need a place to live, work, and cool off. Obviously, letting in more people means you need more houses, but the issue is more complex. Canada's white-collar immigration strategy compounds the issue. While it accords equal weight to trade school and university, most of the people who have the ability to fly to North America are white-collar and college-educated. As a result, the eventual immigrants are as well. People who are highly educated need to work in more urban areas, where their skills can land them a job. Along with their higher incomes, they bid up the price of housing in those very areas. This provides a key part of the puzzle. While we're discussing Canada on a national level, remember that all housing is local. Take a look at this graph. It's population growth, driven almost entirely by immigration. You can see it gradually picked up steam under Trudeau, and then especially so after the pandemic. The surge is something Canadians, unlike their southern neighbors, broadly agree on. But they're not building nearly enough homes for them. This is housing starts by year. The number of homes where construction broke ground. You can see it rose during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, before crashing in the early 80s. It skyrocketed right after, but it was followed by an equally dramatic burst. It was low during the remainder of the century, finally picking back up in the run-up to the housing crisis. Afterwards, though, it returned, and since the pandemic, has set new records. At first glance, one might think things are back on track. After all, housing starts are setting record highs. What this data hides, though, is relative terms. The population has nearly doubled since 1976, but it built only 16% more homes during the record 2021 than that year. Not to mention all those years with low amounts of building while the population was still growing. For a problem so hard and with effects so serious, it's actually pretty simple. If you're wondering why Canada lets more people in than ever, yet doesn't build enough houses for them, well, you're not alone. It's complicated. But the story isn't over. Next, let's cover labor. Canada is one of the world's most educated countries according to the OECD. The immigration system plays a role. In addition, many Canadians, like Americans, see college as the path to success. As a result, the nation lacks people who are skilled at blue-collar work. Retirements in these industries in recent years has made the problem worse, especially as people working these jobs tend to be older. For example, fully 1 in 3 journeymen in Ontario are older than 55. While white-collar workers can be found abroad, bricklayers, carpenters, and ironworkers typically can't. Meaning the shortage is going to go from bad to worse in the coming years. Lack of workers has already prevented developers from working on projects they would like to. In response to the housing crisis, Canada has adopted a national housing strategy, but critics have already come out to issue warnings. Some of the provinces are already falling behind the expected targets. If the country really wants to build millions of homes over the next decade, it needs workers. How it does that, however, is a different question. There's more to this crisis though. Next up is foreign capital. So Canada possesses one of the best traits for an investment destination: stability. When dealing with assets, the last thing you want is disruption to the norm. In this regard, Canada is both lucky and wise. The country has a robust law system, strong personal and property rights, and a long history of peace and prosperity. In addition, their only border is with a strong ally in the US, one of the most competent nations on Earth. While the country has its problems, most of the world doesn't pass this checklist. As a result, it's a good place to park your cash, especially if you foresee tough times ahead. Since the late 1990s, Canadian real estate has boomed, quintupling in value, the fastest among developed economies, in part because of this. But contrary to common belief, it isn't all wealthy investors from China buying up real estate, and thus driving up prices. This capital flight from Asia was significant, but according to a real estate economist at the University of British Columbia, was overstated. In 2016, at the peak of the craze before the tax was introduced, only 6% of home buyers in Vancouver were foreign, compared to 1% today. While this didn't include residents buying properties with money from their families abroad, it did temporarily make Vancouver cheaper. Unfortunately, however, even afterwards, prices have continued climbing. This long stretch has made people view housing across the country not just as a place to raise a family, but as an asset. You see, much of the speculation actually comes from within Canada, but we'll get back to that point later. For this reason, Canada's recent ban on foreigners buying residential property probably won't be as impactful as hoped for. It's a significant factor, especially in a few areas like South or Eastern Vancouver. But even there, its influence is limited. Finally, without further ado, the elephant in the room: zoning. In Canada, urban geography looks like this. Cities have a dense center with relatively sparse populations radiating outwards. The problem is that the population has continued growing, but more and more people are trying to live in the same strips around some of the largest cities. Zoning hasn't kept up with the times. Making matters worse, Canada's suburbs tend to be a bit more dense than those in the US, so there isn't much hanging fruit. All of it is residential, but most of it only for a very specific type of building: a detached home for a single family. Developers simply can't build duplexes or triplexes or anything else in the missing middle. While all policies have pros and cons, having some get rich in equity and the others rent until 40 is not ideal. You might think, logically, well, we'll change them. Pass a bill to make it easier to build homes. If you're old enough to be interested in this type of video, then you're old enough to know just how complex a task that can be. Canada is a federal system. The national government is based in Ottawa, with the provinces beneath them and then the locales. Like in the US, because the government is so decentralized, issues are only brought up to the level they need to be solved at. This is great, even fantastic, for everything except housing. Municipalities handling zoning is better than Ottawa, but it comes with a price. Local governments are smaller and thus are much easier to influence in a community. When a municipality tries to allow more duplexes or triplexes, local residents often get in the way. The reason behind their actions is straightforward, even common sense. If the explicit goal is to augment the housing stock and thereby lower prices, people oppose it. They don't want their assets eaten away at. After all, equity in one's house is the primary source of wealth for most Canadians. Local residents, understandably, also don't want their communities heavily disrupted. Construction is noisy and new neighbors are nosy. They're often called NIMBYs, or not in my backyard. In community after community, local residents stand together against new development. They do everything from launching petitions to running for local office. Many of these organizations have no real power, but they can appeal an issue for a few $100s, sending it through the court system, costing months, years, and money, making it so overwhelming that businesses and developers simply go home. When questioned about the housing shortage, they claim you can just develop new homes in the next neighborhood. Don't mess up our thing. Except, you can't. The problem is, that community says the same thing. And then again. All over Canada. So that's the mystery. A supply shortfall amid a demand surge. At least, it was. Because then came the pandemic. Predictably, the lockdowns distorted the economy. We've all heard the stories. With everyone locked inside, restaurants went under while pool installers made it big. Real estate was one of the affected industries, but it happened unevenly. You see, houses that were already expensive before the pandemic got even pricier, as the sorts of people who bought these homes were more likely to be working management or white-collar jobs. Not only making higher incomes, but because they're at desks, instead of losing their jobs, they simply went remote. Restrictions on other sorts of spending made investing in real estate not only logical, but the only option. Buying an in-ground pool not only provided something to do, but raised the value of your house. Even better, in order to combat some of the economic factors of the lockdowns, the Bank of Canada slashed rates, encouraging buyers to take loans. There's more to this story though. Remember from a few minutes ago that much of the speculation comes from within Canada. The reason has been quite straightforward. Because housing has been so strong for so long, many Canadians see it as an asset. Because of that, what better investment could you do than buying a condo in Vancouver and then renting it out? When you don't want it anymore, simply sell it. Now you're in the green. But the story changed. The central bank raised rates to deal with inflation. The sky-high prices combined with interest rates only our grandparents remember finally put in the number behind many of the real estate markets. An increase in foreclosures followed. Making matters worse, many Canadians don't know what a housing crunch actually is like. Many feel like you might as well get in now, before prices shoot up further. So that is the long and short of Canada's housing crisis. A completely self-made mess. A country home to 40 million people, competing for fewer and fewer houses while the number of real estate agents surged. If you enjoyed my content, please feel free to leave a comment on what topic I should cover next. Thanks for watching.